When you started your own firm, what were some of the triggers or that mindset shift that was needed for you to take that leap of faith?
Was able to make the decision of saying, well, I would rather be unemployed in a pandemic than continue to work where I was working.
It's really hard to get the starting 3-4 clients, right? How has your customer acquisition changed from the initial couple years to now?
I've never been shy to realize where I was struggling and where I was failing as a business owner. I think the biggest change with that was bringing someone onto our team whose exclusive role is all of the client management and acquisition, from identifying opportunities all the way through sort of getting that contract signed.
How actually architects find owners or developers to bid for these projects?
Architectural services is not a commodity, right? There's not people who need it every single day.
Especially with residential construction, how do you manage clients' expectations with what their vision is and what their budget limitations are?
Something that we want to have as much of an objective level of successful.
Flip side, with commercial construction, have you seen any patterns with client expectations?
The expectations on the commercial side are far more focused on the communication and the speed and the efficiency with which you provide services, more so than the aesthetic side of things.
How the smaller firms, smaller architectural firms plan out their fee structure. In this episode of Constructing Tomorrow, we have Nathan Aleskovsky. Nathan is the president and principal at Aleskovsky Architecture and Interiors, which is a residential and commercial architectural design firm based out of Florida. In this episode, we talk about how to grow through referral work while starting out, strategies for navigating economic uncertainty as a young firm, how to partner with contractors and consultants for smoother project delivery, what fee structure maximizes both client trust and firm profitability, how to balance creative vision with strict project budgets and timelines, advice for architects planning to start their own practice, and much more. With that said, I bring you Nathan. Hi Nathan, thanks for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, super excited, especially for this episode. You're the first architect on the show. And it'd be really awesome to hear all the stories that happened before construction. And also, I wanted to touch upon you have your own venture now, been probably 5 years in the business with your own firm. So we're here, curious to hear all the stories about it. But before we dive right into it, I wanted to ask you: you had an incredible academic and professional career, and if you have to come up with 3 pivotal moments that has shaped your entire journey, what would those be?
Sure. I think for on a professional level, I think there's 3 moments that I think stand out pretty clearly. The first is that I worked during graduate school for a commercial real estate broker that focused on tenant rep primarily, and in that it was to see sort of the stage and the process of going through finding new land and new property, even before the architect is really involved in that. I think opened my eyes a lot to what is already under consideration by clients and all of the team that surrounds them, even before an architect or a contractor is engaged for the project. And so that I think was pretty pivotal in shaping how I went through sort of remainder of my graduate career and what I was focusing on. That led me really to start pursuing, also while I was at Syracuse, a master's in entrepreneurship and emerging enterprise, which basically allowed me to focus on the real estate development side of things, basically almost a mini MBA, if you will, that I think influenced a lot about how I started my own firm and the path that I've taken. I think the second thing was the first professional job that I had out after college. My wife was in law school, so she landed a federal clerkship that was in Youngstown, Ohio. So we went there, and the firm that I worked for there was fantastic. I still have a great relationship with them. But given the size that they were, I think there was 15 or 17 people there at the time. I was exposed to a lot of the industry from the initial conceptual phase of things all the way through the design process and construction. So unlike being at a really large firm, there was a lot of where you might end up being pigeonholed doing very particular things over and over again. I was very quickly shown and had responsibility for all phases of the design process and throughout the construction process, and so that was really again sort of in that stage of my career of really learning more than doing was really eye opening to be able to see everything that happens and understand the full process from beginning to end. And then I think the final thing was sort of more on the what not to do is the firms that I worked for after that. I started to realize that there's a different way that this process and this profession should be run, and how clients should be managed, and the expectations and the level of service and trust and commitment that I don't think were being followed at all in the previous in the organizations I was with sort of after Ohio. And that's kind of what led me to start my own firm, which I think is the best decision I've ever made.
Awesome. So I think it's more of from your past experiences, you obviously learn a lot. And I wanted to, this leads me to my next question about when you started your own firm, what were some of the triggers or what were that mindset shift that was needed for you to take that leap of faith? Because always when you're starting out something new, you kind of have that self-doubt. Okay, what if it doesn't work out? So I guess how did you overcome that feeling?
It was in my case, it was sort of a matter of not having another option, I guess, or choosing not to. It was I started this firm in April of 2020, which was 2.5, 3 months into the pandemic, and was at a level of sort of frustration and disappointment in the organization that I was with at the time, that was able to make the decision of saying, well, I would rather be unemployed in a pandemic than continue to work where I was working. So um, to me, it seemed very natural to just do things the way that I wanted to have them done. And the relationships that I had made, from real estate through the firms I was with from Ohio to across the state of Florida, were kind of instrumental, and they were very excited to see that I was going out on my own. And so the work was able to start almost immediately. No one knew at the time that the amount of home renovation and additions that would be put into the demand for that during the pandemic as it continued to linger on. And so while my background was primarily commercial architecture, I jumped right into the residential side of things because that's what was available. No one was opening restaurants or office spaces at the time, but I had a steady stream of work um, virtually right away on the residential side. So, I mean, it was a circumstance that it seemed crazy at the time, but it's the level of happiness and satisfaction that I felt immediately upon doing that on my own it was irreplaceable.
Starting during COVID is so insane to me. It's like everything is shut down. I don't know if I was probably not in the US at that time, early 2020s. But were there construction projects still running? I don't know what the regulations were at that time.
There were, things definitely slowed down, and as the uncertainty that was in the market everywhere, held up certain financial aspects, I think, on larger investments. But the lower interest rates that people were able to obtain through refinancing their own home or buying a new home freed up a lot of cash flow for residential sort of single family homeowners, um, that gave them the opportunity to renovate or add additions to. And I think being sort of now all of a sudden stuck at home with your entire family, people start to sit there, and as they're looking at the wall, realize, hey, we should probably do something, or we need more space, or all of those things. And so it became the right time to for a lot of people to invest in improving their own home. So it was definitely a strange time coming from the mostly commercial world where people that I was, would even initially talk to in the beginning of April, by May on the in the on the commercial side were saying we're not going to do anything right now. We're going to wait to see what happens, and so a lot of that kind of disappeared. But on the residential side, I mean, it was opening the floodgates, so to speak. As soon as I was able to get the sort of word out about who I am and what I was doing, and um, I spent $0 on marketing or advertising in any way. It was all referral based because the contractors, the interior designers, everybody knew somebody that was doing some level of renovation, and so I embraced that 100% and dove into that. And then over the past 5 years, have been able to focus more on custom higher end residential, and then also a lot on the commercial side again. So we're pretty evenly split now, but that has taken 5 years to kind of get back to that level. And it's interesting because it was always something that I never thought I would enjoy doing, the residential side of things. And then sort of being forced into it, learned how much fun that side of it can be, but also still enjoy a lot of the challenging that come with doing the commercial work.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point about embracing the situation, especially when you're running a business, right? You rather do something than do nothing. But obviously, in this 5 years, the business has evolved. Now you're doing a lot of commercial projects as well. And you talked about some business operations, marketing, and we'll get to the business side of things. I wanted to know, early on during pandemic, you did adjust to the type of projects you were taking, but when you're starting out a business, you obviously have a business plan. So how has that evolved from day one to year five?
So the given the I guess the framework with how I started this company, I never put together a formal business plan. So in the high school that I attended was a magnet school that was in the program I was in was a global business and entrepreneurship magnet program. I had a minor in business at my undergrad at University of Florida, and then again, so throughout my formal education, have been involved and have written several different business plans. And then also while in grad school, we started a friend of mine and I started a software company in the um, architectural engineering space that would do automated building code analysis. And we were a little too early to the table. I think now with the AI revolution that is here, that would have been significantly easier to do. So that ultimately was not successful, but we went through a lot of business plan competitions and understood the investment process and the seed round funding and going through all of that. So we were ultimately pretty successful in generating a lot of interest for it, but unsuccessful in implementing a an end product that was viable at an ever changing and affordable rate. So, but that's kind of gave me enough sort of um, back pocket knowledge to feel confident about when I was moving forward with my own venture as an architectural design firm, that I didn't necessarily need to write everything down, right, and create that formal um, document, because I was not looking for outside funding. I did not need a loan to start up, right. I had sort of all of the information that I needed to do that, and working from home on my home computer and everything else, it didn't require a lot of investment capital to move forward with that. So I do think I still went through sort of the whole process mentally that you would go through in understanding what the time frame to get online and the investment of time and my own capital to move forward with things. And I went through the business plan development process without actually, mentally, and through discussions with my wife and friends, and tried to figure out where to position myself in the market, but never actually put together a formal document.
Got it. Were you focused on Florida at the time?
I was primarily in the beginning because the pandemic was not making travel all that easy. But and really just kind of embracing the digital, design review process that I think a lot of the industry has shied away from. And even today, we enjoy doing a lot of our client interactions in person. We think it's significantly more effective to do. But jumping onto that, we were still able to work, being licensed in Ohio and then in Florida at the time, was able to do work and stayed in communication with the firm that I was previously with when I lived there for a few years. So since then, I have an NCARB certificate that allows for reciprocal licensing in most states without a separate exam. So the firm's licensed now in I think 10 or so states that we're doing work in. But initially, we definitely focused, entirely on in Florida. But again, there was never, I think, just with the demand that we had locally of people trying to renovate their homes and do things, there was not really the opportunity to say, "Hey, let me go explore other markets," right? Because I had a full plate just without having to do any of that. So
Yeah. Were you just alone at the time doing everything?
yep. So initially, I think the first probably about 6 months in is when I hired the first employee, basically to do drafting and the sort of document preparation of things. And so as we've grown through there, we're now at five full time employees and multiple other partnerships and independent contractors that we work with for a variety of different tasks. So it's grown steadily and organically. We have not put ourselves in a position where we're sort of overcommitted, and we've appreciated the steady growth.
Got it. When did you get your first commercial project?
Uh, I guess the first one of note was a restaurant that was in the Leesburg area. That I think at the time I was definitely shocked that I think this was maybe in 21 that someone was saying, "Hey, I run open a restaurant right now," because everything was still really shut down. And so, it was a very unique individual, an interesting client, and I think somewhat unsurprisingly, the restaurant didn't last through the rest of the pandemic. I don't think there was as much demand as he anticipated there would be, but that at least started to that was one of the first, and we slowly got some more commercial work. We worked with landlords who were trying to prep their space for new tenants that were coming in that a lot of people had vacated from. So kind of just returning a lot of office and retail space back to vanilla shell space that was ready for rental, and helping them in their process of making it the most attractive as possible for new tenants. So it started to, you could see the turnaround coming as probably three-quarters of the way through 21 on into 2022. We started to get more commercial work after that.
The reason why I asked is like initially on your company's name, when you don't really have much projects on your portfolio, especially commercial projects, it's really hard to get the starting 3, 4 clients, right? Curious to know, how has your customer acquisition changed from the initial couple years to now?
I think the biggest change with that was bringing someone onto our team, Frank, whose exclusive role is sort of everything, all of the client management and acquisition, from identifying opportunities all the way through sort of getting that contract signed. And at that point is when it is turned over to the design and production side of things. And so the that we hired Frank in 2020, beginning of 23, and so before that it was always a struggle as to where is the time spent, and in trying to find new work and trying to balance the production of the existing clients and the communication. And I've never been shy to realize where I was struggling and where I was failing as a business owner. And the client communication has always been something that is the most difficult um, aspect of the business. That you're always working with multiple clients. Your time is always stretched, and for an email to come in or a phone call that you miss, right? It's not, or an email that you can't get back to, in the same day. Those kind of things. The as an individual who works with other service providers, right? There's a level of tension of, do they care about me? Are they working on my projects? They have my money, those kind of stuff. And so managing those expectations and trying to stay in communication with clients is always the struggle, particularly I think in a creative field where a lot of us get into that sort of flow state, and we are doing the creative artistic things that we enjoy doing, and then all of a sudden it's been 12 hours and we haven't answered the phone or returned emails or any of the rest of that stuff. But that's also what motivates us to do good work. So balancing that with somebody who's not focused on that and can get back to clients and manage the client side of the project while the other part of the team is managing the technical and design side of the project was absolutely critical to how we've grown as we have today.
Can you shed light on how actually architects find owners or developers to bid for these projects?
I don't know if there's any one particular way. I think that there's is a lot of it is about getting your name out and being a part of the community that you're trying to do work in. And that myself being having a young family, I've got two young kids and want to spend time with them and have that work life balance while also trying to be an entrepreneur and run a business is always challenging. And so part of that too is where Frank has really excelled is in joining the networking events and getting out and making the community aware of who we are and what we do, because architectural services is not a commodity, right? There's not people who need it every single day, and we need it to be top of mind and get ourselves in front of real estate brokers and mortgage originators and contractors and high end interior designers and everyone else who is also somehow getting contacted by people who are at some phase of a project needing an architect, so that we become introduced through those means, right? So all of our we've had a few projects that have come in sort of organically of, hey, I was googling and I found this, and um, you know but our best projects that are we of the clients we enjoy working with the most, that have been the most profitable for us, that have been the most successful for the clients, have all come from personal or professional referrals.
Got it. Especially with residential construction, I'm kind of curious, how do you manage clients' expectations with what their vision is and what their budget limitations are?
I think a lot of it is involving the clients heavily through the design process. We are very much not, and we tell our clients that we are not a sort of ego driven design firm. We don't have a unique style that is very specific to us, that you would have with other, what they call architects, right? That you seek out a certain individual or company based off of the work that they've done in the past, and say, I want something that looks like that, or the name that comes with it. That's how a lot of museums and libraries and sort of higher profile projects come about. Not always, but in a lot of instances, so to say that so and so architect designed this building, and so because we are much more we're smaller, we're younger, we don't have anywhere near that level of clout. Is that we tell them, our clients, that we check our ego at the door, essentially, that you're not working with someone who's going to try to sort of inflict his own vision and design for your house. It's more, we look at ourselves as problem solvers, and to say that any requirement that or just want or need that you have in your house is a constraint that we have to work within. If you say you want a 3-car garage or an 8-car garage, right? That you cook a certain way, or that you know like to sleep in on the weekend, whatever sort of physical or mental or emotional aspect of your home and your life that you want to embrace and have your home reflect, just becomes something that we will work to incorporate that, right? And what that ends up looking like aesthetically is something that we want to have as much of an objective level of success for, to say that these were the problems that you brought to us about what's not working in your current home that you're trying to do. And if we've solved those problems in a way that the client also agrees that they were solved, we can consider that a success. The subjective part of that, to the neighbor or passerby on the street to say, well, I don't really like that. Well, that's the subjective part that not everyone's going to agree with. But if objectively the client loves the end result, to us that's the success. And so we've done projects that maybe we don't put on our website, that doesn't necessarily provide the messaging of the clients that we're normally seeking out, right? If that's a lead generation source for us, but are 100% successful projects that came in on time and under budget, and the client was thrilled with it, but it doesn't photograph well, for example, and we're okay with that. We're that to us is we are just as happy with that project as we are with one that can be published in a magazine.
Yeah, maybe that is your differentiator. Like, you cater to the client's need, and it doesn't really have to be fancy looking to make it in a magazine. But hey, if it satisfies what the client's requirements are, that's the main purpose, right?
It is that is our main goal for sure.
So, curious on the flip side with commercial construction, have you seen any patterns with client expectations when you compare it to the residential ones?
I think the expectations on the commercial side are far more focused on the communication and the speed and the efficiency with which you provide services, more so than the aesthetic side of things. There's obviously benefits to all aspects of that, but and again, it depends on if your commercial client is a sort of owner operator of that. If you're designing a dental office for the dentist that's going to be in that space, versus a landlord looking to just create a leasable space that a dentist would then go into, they obviously have more invested if they're going to be using that space, and so it's a little bit more like a residential client. But there's definitely a focus on what is the return on certain aspects of things that are perhaps aesthetically focused. That if is spending 3 times as much on a certain flooring, does that actually mean is going to last longer, that it will generate more revenue for me? Will it do those things, or can I get away with something that is at the bargain basement level, that I'm okay with replacing if it wears out, but I can get in for less money? There's a lot less personal investment in that, versus on the residential side of saying, well, this is the tile, or this is the cabinet hardware that I love, and I will we'll adjust other things to make sure I have this. That doesn't happen anywhere near as much on the commercial side.
Got it. And so, if you're looking back at your journey, right, of starting a firm, what would you say were some of the things that you felt would be easier but turned out to be harder, and vice versa?
I think the most eye-opening thing that I experienced was the amount of competition in an area like Winter Park for design firms. Really meant that there was early on, I guess, at a certain level of clientele and the flexibility in their budget, it was sort of a race to the bottom. Of we were always being challenged with people who were either not licensed architects, or just sort of building designers or drafts people that could have a structural engineer sign off on things, who could do the deliverable that we were going to be giving the client for something significantly less expensive. The value of what we're providing in terms of the knowledge that goes into it, and the the way that we can guide a client through that process and providing a certain volume and clarity to the construction detailing that an architect provides that is not typically provided by a drafting service. That became much more of a educational process to try to explain to potential clients what the difference is of, because at the end of the day, if they wanted a set of house plans that can get permitted and built, there's multiple ways you can get that, but the value of what's inside those documents is very different. And so that was eye opening for me, because in Ohio, and again, I was not privy at the early stage that I was at to a lot of the business negotiations and client negotiations that was going through, but there wasn't the same volume of design firms in Northeast Ohio. And so the lack of competition there, I think, also gave the firm that I was with a lot of ability to sort of dictate the price a little bit more. And so there wasn't, another 50 options that people could go to. And if there were, several others, they were also mostly other architectural design firms who were charging the same amount of money and representing that. So it became more relationship based. And so, as our firm has grown, it has become more relationship based, and our clients have become less budget conscious on the actual dollar value of the fees, and more so looking at the value that we provide within that. Um, and looking at our services as an asset and an investment in the design process, rather than sort of this necessary expense, which is, I think, a lot of when you're budgeting for, let's say, putting an addition on your home, and you say, well, I'm going to spend $250,000, and then an architect and an engineer and all these other people say they want pieces of that. Well, now you're left with a lot less than $250,000 of the things you're going to buy to build that, right? So you might be at 80% of that once all of the professionals need to have fees for their time to take out of that. And so that has, what is the value that you're providing there? And so that has shifted, but that was the biggest thing I think that that I was very shocked by, I think, in this market, that I wasn't necessarily prepared for. And I gave several proposals, early on, that was sort of laughed at, to say, like, there's no way I'm paying this, right? And so, and those still happen, and we're okay with that. I think if you're not, if people aren't turning down any of your proposals, you're probably not charging enough. And so, we balance that and try to keep a steady workflow. But it was eye opening for sure.
That's an interesting insight. Looks like it boils down to the mindset shift that is needed, client relationships, and obviously cost is something which is always going to be there. Curious to know, and we can get to like how the big firms do their fee structure, but for like curious to know how the smaller firms, smaller architectural firms plan out their fee structure. Is it just based on the number of hours you anticipate working on that job, or how does the fee structure looks like?
So I don't know if we're unique in this, but the we do not price our projects based off of the square footage of the job. We don't price it based off of a percentage of construction. We try to find a pricing strategy that our financial interests are aligned with the client, and so we don't want to be in a position where our clients feel that if we're making a project larger, that it's for our own gain rather than for the client's interest, or that if we're making something cost more and saying, well, we really can't go that route and reduce this by 10% because somehow now we're going to be negatively impacted by that financially. So we typically put together a fixed fee that is, a combination of an estimate of our time based on our experience and how much that's going to take, along with the complexity of the project. A 10,000 square foot warehouse versus a 10,000 square foot urgent care are two very different projects. And so, to price on square footage for that is to us seems a little insane. And so we also understand that there's going to be more complexity during the construction process as well. And so factoring in all of those aspects to it, we develop our fee structure that way. A lot of our early stage work we try to do on an hourly basis to get an understanding of what the client is actually looking for, what their budget can support, what they can actually, so how much space do they actually need. So we typically start with a design assessment, if you will, that kind of gets into sort of a low upfront investment on both of our sides. That we look to make sure we're covering our cost, and they're invested a little bit for us to dig into all of the zoning, and land use research, the setbacks, the wetlands, all of that information, as well as work with them to kind of extract what are the needs of the project, whether that's residential or commercial, and understand, a client can come to you and say, well, I need a 20,000 square foot medical office building. If that is a landlord looking to build spec space, well, then, that's typically sort of ROI driven. If we can get 20,000 square feet on this, we're going to build every square inch of it, versus an owner operator to say, well, if we can find a way for you to build 14,000 square feet instead, like, how did they arrive at that 20,000 square foot number? And to dig into how they're going to use the space, and try to be efficient with everything, and start the sort of design planning process, so that once we get through that, that's when we would actually make our full architectural and engineering proposal to them, once we've actually narrowed down specifically what they need, rather than just taking kind of a stab in the dark of saying, I need a 2-story or 5-story building or whatever that is. There's no way for us to really understand the requirements of the job until then. So we break that up into those phases, and that's been working for us so far.
That makes sense. The last question I had is, any advice that you would like to give to young architects who are planning to have their own firm in the future?
I think learn as much as you possibly can about construction, and get in the field and be a part of the actual, realization of the project, and not be trapped at a desk. And if you want to work for a large firm that has the notoriety and the types of projects that are there, maybe in school intern for construction companies, do things that will provide an understanding of what the people are doing that are looking at our drawings, and actually having to physically make that happen. The the best compliments we get are from contractors who are impressed with the documents that we produce, in terms of the amount of detail that's there and the clarity. And then the with that, on the client side, is the accuracy with which the budgeting and the bids from contractors can come in at. So the more ambiguity or lack of sort of constructability in the drawings is going to make construction take longer. It's going to cost the client more. Everyone's going to be really upset at the entire process if the work that we do doesn't really make sense. It might look pretty. It might be just award winning from its aesthetic function, qualities, but the success that a client will judge you on, and that contractors will judge you on in terms of referrals later, is how well are you able to achieve not just the aesthetic vision, but the timeline, the budget, the constructability, the amount of change orders and other things that go through that. I mean, we can right if we can limit those as much as possible by putting together a really ironclad set of drawings, and that, I think, you can only really do if you understand how the construction actually works. And so I think that is absolutely the most critical. And it's a complaint that we hear all the time from contractors, is that they're so used to getting drawings, and you probably experience this on in your sort of day to day, is that you look at things and you say, why this is insane. This doesn't make sense. There's no way this can happen. The specifications don't line up with the drawings at all. There's standard details in here that don't apply in any way. And then that turns into just a whole bunch of, finger pointing and back and forth and RFIs and clarifications. And, it makes everybody look bad, particularly to the client, right? That in a traditional setup, the contractor and the architect are both working for. And we both want to look good to the client. We both want to look like we know what we're doing and that the client's money is protected and well invested. And if everyone's just pointing at each other, blaming each other for whose mistake this was, nobody wins.
Perfect. This was awesome advice. Especially, I love the part where you said early on architects should also work in construction firms. I think that makes a whole lot of sense going forward in their journey. Thanks again, Nathan, for taking our time to do this.
My pleasure. I appreciate the invite. Thank you.